fulfilling council's wishes. So we have a limited time frame. It's going to be tough, it's going to be arduous, but I certainly do appreciate the time that you're putting into this to make sure that we do it the right way. And I want to come by and say thank you on behalf of the mayor and myself, but also I wanted to just take a couple minutes and then I'm going to turn it over because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Let's remember the purpose of this. The purpose is we have 500 human beings affected by this. 500 human beings. Make sure as a community we're doing everything we can to help these individuals move forward, to help make them successful, to re-enter society in a way that moves them forward. Not only do we have to do this for them and their family and friends, but it's good for public safety in the city of Denver. Also, it sends a message to those employers that have invested time that the city is serious about ensuring that the commitments and the commitments we've made with them, working alongside them, is met as well. That's a pretty difficult task ahead of us. But as the mayor and I had a conversation immediately after the vote, and today we believe that the best way to handle that is listen to the experts. Listen to the individuals who do this work each and every day. So I'm certainly looking forward to your recommendations as we move forward to ensure that these individuals can succeed in this, the greatest city in America. So thank you once again. I'm going to turn it over to our two chairs, Hassan and Greg, and look forward to your recommendations and implementing those recommendations in the future. Thank you. Gentlemen.
I can see that.
So we did, Hassan and I, after some extensive selected co-chair that we thought was uniquely qualified for this process. Johanna is able to, both being part of the criminal justice system in a previous capacity and now doing a lot of work with community partners, able to navigate and bridge this conversation. So we think she's an excellent coach. So Johanna Leal is our facilitator. I don't know, Hassan, if you want to add anything to this?
All right. Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, everyone.
Again, my name is Johanna Leal, and my role tonight will be facilitating the conversation of this committee. I just want to start by recognizing all the community members and stakeholders who showed up tonight. I think your presence reflects how important this opportunity is for this group to re-envision the future of community corrections in Denver. Just as a note of process, I will be facilitating the conversation among everyone at this table, and tonight we're not going to take questions and answers from all the stakeholders here. However, I do want to say that part of the task of this group is to come up with a process to get public input to guide this process along. So we will discuss that and give an opportunity to receive and elicit feedback from everyone. Okay. I'd like to quickly go through the agenda and then start with introductions. So tonight, if you have an agenda in front of you, you'll see, we'll do a little introduction of everyone sitting around this table, and then we'd like to take a little time to discuss a future state and to take some time to set aside before we jump into barriers, problems, challenges, to really think through what can different look like and what opportunities are presented to us to really leverage the assets we have. Then we're going to move into kind of scoping and framing the issue. As a reminder, the scope of this group is really narrow and the time here. And we'll finish today by setting the agenda for the next meeting and getting something on the calendar. So we want to set a little time aside for that. So as a reminder, this group is here today to focus on recommendations for future programming, also to review the process and improve the process for community corrections, residents, and families for complaints and feedback. And also, this group is going to establish a process to get feedback from the community in this process. Following that, we're going to have a presentation from Andrew Webb, who is from the City Planner's Office on zoning and the zoning that impacts community corrections usage and what they are doing and things they are changing. And then we will follow up with just a discussion about this moving forward and what we want to get to next. Great. So I'd like to start with introductions, and I'm going to ask this group to give a little more information tonight than just your name and your role. that's written on paper in front of you. So if you would, I'd love to know and share with this group, what skills, experience, or perspectives do you uniquely bring to this process so that we know how to leverage where you're coming from and your talents? I'd also like to know what you want to get out of this process. So what's important for you as an outcome of this process when we're here together? Right? Would Greg like to start?
Would you like me to start?
Yeah, we'll go this way. Hold on, go this way.
Before I do that, if I could just point to everybody at the table, there's a notepad that staff put together, information on community corrections, the statutes that govern community corrections are in there. There's the latest annual report from Denver system. So it's in there. There's also a flash drive, so if you want to have so my name is Greg Morrow. I'm the city's director of community corrections and been in this position. Well, I've been with the city for 23 years. I've been in this position since 2001. I'm sorry, 2010. And you know, I think the skills that I bring, obviously I have experience of the criminal justice system, but I think more importantly, I'm able to adapt and pivot when needed. And I think maybe the skill I want to utilize the most is not my strongest skill, but I really want to listen. Because I think we're at a point that I wouldn't necessarily agree how we got here and the way we got here, but we're here. And I think we need to take this opportunity to improve the system. So I really want to listen.
Sure. My name is Eric Williams, and I'm Deputy Director, Denver Department of Public Safety. Skills that I bring to the table, I've been in this role now 15 months and have had the pleasure of working very closely with Greg Morrow, overseeing community corrections pretrial. Historic background, I've worked at Savio House as well as with Mile High Task, Treatment Accountability for Safer Communities, and have been and operated within the criminal justice system for a number of years, 12 years as a special agent with the FBI, working in numerous capacities as a street agent and as a supervisor, licensed attorney, and so looking at this comprehensively from the totality of criminal justice and how we can make our community safer, I look at this as an opportunity that has been presented to us, and I understand that we need to do this efficiently. What I hope to get out of this process is just that an improved system. I think we have an opportunity here to determine how to effectively move forward from a standpoint that can meet the interests of all sides.
Good evening, my name is Candi CdeBaca, City Council Representative for this district, District 9, which is also one of the more saturated districts for community corrections, amongst other things. Before coming to this position, I was doing youth development work. I'm a social worker, so I've worked in victim services, I've worked in compliance, federal compliance, and so I have unique experience, real world experience. My brother's in prison, has been in and out of several halfway houses in the state, and I live across the street from one of the halfway houses here in Denver, and have had many family members in and out of this system, and would like to see it change, and make sure that happens.
My name is Jane Franken. I'm a citizen member of the Denver Community Corrections Board and serve right now as the chairman, and I have for a long time. But I do have a lot of criminal justice background. I actually have a degree in criminal justice, although it's been a while. And I guess because I've been in community corrections for such a long time, public safety has always been a primary issue for the Denver Community Corrections Board. But I will tell you personally, I'm more concerned about the clients that we have. We have 500 people that I don't think need to be dismissed summarily because of reasons that I'm not sure. So I'm really hoping that we will come to some resolution and make it a program that works for the clients. They're coming out, they want to come do a good job, and I think that that's really important, and that's my goal.
Manny Rodriguez, and I guess I'm the godfather, grandfather, father of community corrections. We started at the VA hospital under the auspices of the Vietnam era veterans. That's where we started most of the programs in Denver. We started William Street Center, we started Independence House, we started Pier 1, we started Stepping Stone. I have probably treated more than 15,000 people that have come through my halfway houses. And I'd say probably not a third of them have got back to prison. The rest of, I think, have gone out successfully into the community. They're not doctors, they're not lawyers, but I think most of them went back to a life where they could live without using drugs or alcohol. I'm here today, I wanted to be part of this group because I know the old way of how community corrections work. I'd like to see what some of the new ways that people are talking about that community corrections can work in Colorado. I think community corrections is needed in Colorado. And when we first started it, all the treatment was in the halfway houses, was in the treatment. Now it's scattered all over where it's not all there. So a person could go back to a halfway house and feel safe, feel like there's going to be some help there. Now it's not that way anymore. It's scattered. I think we need to get back to the model where all the treatment is in one facility. The groups, encounters, everything is one right there. So that's the old way. Maybe the new way, you can teach me something.
Thanks, grandfather. I'm Godfather too. I'm Joe Tomey, representing the state's Division of Criminal Justice and Public Safety. I think many of you know DCJ is the management organization for community corrections in the state. We're the group that the money comes through and tries to provide some technical assistance and support the community. My background is I actually ran a community corrections program, not a residential facility, but in Greg's capacity in Boulder for 6 years. And my enthusiasm, and first of all, gratitude for joining this group, is as we kind of took the Band-Aid off the discussion, what can we learn at the Division of Criminal Justice where we can look at this as a model for enhancing community corrections across the state. There was a lot of hand-wringing when this started, this process started. But as we all sat down together, it's like, this is a real opportunity. And if we can focus on being flexible, I represent the bureaucracy, I apologize, and listen hard. I think that we could pick up a lot of what's going to happen here and impress upon the rest of the state, the General Assembly, et cetera, that there are ways to modernize the way that we do our community-based services. And although there's pressure on us to help, I guess in some ways, hopefully there's pressure on this group to be a model for the rest of the state. So thanks for the invitation.
My name is Michael Anderson. I am a first-generation Denver native. God blessed me with the opportunity to be a Denver police officer for 34 years. I've been married for 38. Should have won a job. I had a number of roles while serving on the Denver Police Department. One of the most memorable and cherished was starting the crisis intervention team for Denver, which ultimately became the state for law enforcement. And that in itself is important to me because I recognized some years ago that our mental health system has become the Department of Corrections, not only here in Colorado, but throughout the United States. So, that's what's important to me, is to make sure that when our Denver citizens and citizens of our other counties come out of the Department of Corrections, they go into a system, however it's made up, into a system to better them as members, and at the same time maintain a safeness, which is also my concern with our citizens here. I was privileged to be appointed to the Governor Ritter, which I served for about 5. I currently am a citizen member of Denver Community Corrections.
My name is Michelle Sykes. I am currently employed for the Colorado Department of Human Services, and I work in a program called CDAP, which is child care. My background and what is important to me is to see a lot of people of color that go through the Department of Corrections and then community corrections to be placed. That is extremely important to me. The skills that I bring, I have been incarcerated and I was sentenced to the Department of Corrections 30 years ago for 25 years for the crime of forgery. And I did time, I went through community corrections. I had to spend a lot of time in community corrections, so I know community corrections very well. I have a son that recently got a DUI and was sentenced to the Department of Corrections for DUI, and then went through community corrections as well. So I feel as a community member that I bring a lot of skills, and what I hope to get out of this is I hope to see change come. I hope to see that we can make progress in the 20th century and that community corrections won't stay totally backwards.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Johnson, the Director of Adult Parole with the Department of Corrections. I've been with the department 24 years. I started my career in the institutions. About 2.5 years ago, I came to the Division of Adult Parole as Deputy Director, and then about 1.5 years later, I was appointed to Director. I also serve on the Denver Community Correction Board, so I think the thing that maybe I can bring to the group is a system perspective, if you will. The other thing, I'm a nerd, and I like organizational development, so hopefully, systems improvement is my background, and maybe that can be part of what I can bring to the table.
This is good. We shut down the private prison GEO Group from being bid doing business in Denver.
All this work really should result in improving our community, and improving the lives of others, and at times, our systems get in the way of that. And so what I'd like to see from this is system improvement.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Torres. I'm a City Council representative for Council District 3, which is Denver's west side, and I'm honored to be here. My prior work was 18 years in Denver Agency for Human Rights and Community Partnerships. I left as the Deputy Director and the Director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs that I led for 13 years. What I bring, I think, is both my background as an anthropologist and really being concerned about this impact point between people, communities, and systems, and where that can be improved and what we need to do in order to improve that space.
disclosure, I have historically a healthy disdain for media because too often I find people more interested in hearing the sound of their own voices than actually addressing issues, and I find that tiring. From the introductions of this group, I started to feel a little less anxious, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. What I want to see come out of this is us take full advantage of the time and this opportunity. Like Greg said, it doesn't really matter how we get there, but actually it kind of does, because we would probably still be stuck in a holding pattern if it were not for Ms. CdeBaca's resolution that was going on this whole code. So here we are, and I have the feeling that sometimes, and I believe that sometimes opportunities cloak in crisis. I think that's where we are now. But this is a really big task. We don't have a lot of time to get at it. There are real actual human lives at play here, and not just the 500 that we're talking about, but, you know, we could squander this time and wind up with just 500 less community correctional beds, and that would be tragic. So that's what I want. I want for us to focus on the task at hand as best we can. And I know their history in this room, in the gallery, as well as around this table between folks. It's understandable. I would like to see us move forward with the issues that we've been tasked to address and not refight battles lost or won. If that makes sense. And so I may not always be the most correct in any setting that I find myself in. I apologize ahead of time. And well, actually, I'm not sincere about that. I'm going to do me and be me, and I hope that that's okay with y'all, because my passion is for representing folks who are trying to get back on track and have a life for real, and you need to have opportunities, and I'm hoping that we can frame something in this room that would be a model for how this really should be done going forward. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. It's really wonderful to hear the diverse experiences, perspectives, and backgrounds of everyone at this table, and I hope we can really bring that out together. My background has been a lot in the reentry space, working both inside systems and understanding how immune systems can be to change, and also working in communities and understanding the frustration from communities at slow system change. So I'm hoping to bring that in here today to help get everyone's voice out around this. I wanted to spend a few minutes before we jump into problem solving and looking at this as a problem that needs to be fixed, and talk about, I think, what Councilwoman Torres said the best, which is true exploration of what's possible. Very easy for our brains. Our brains are wired to poke holes in things, to shoot down ideas, to find all the yes buts and what won't work about things. And I would like to have a brainstorm for a few minutes about what different looks like, right? What can we imagine? And thinking that in a way of imagining an ideal state with no obstacles, right? Well, we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about obstacles, real and imaginary, right? So I'm wondering from this group if we can hear about, in your mind, what does different look like and what is the ideal state?
I'll happily start. Hassan, I'm really excited that you're co-chairing this group, because I think what you've done with your work is really show us what's possible when we trust the people most affected by this system to lead in this system. And so when I think about what's possible, I think about people who have been in community corrections leading the solutions. I think about us not treating halfway houses like warehouses, starting with changing the zoning to recognizing that these are communities, living, learning, healthy communities that we're trying to create. And so I see a much smaller community size. I also see us not relinquishing this opportunity or this power to private companies that make profit off of this work.
So I'm hearing you say focusing more on leveraging the knowledge and wisdom of people with lived experience. Also kind of giving some kudos to Hassan and all he's done in his work, moving away from privates and maybe making them smaller in size.
Yeah, and I think with Hassan's work specifically, it's the permanent element of what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to address the person for the time that they're in community corrections. We're truly trying to pipeline them into permanent solutions, permanent housing, permanent jobs, and permanent mental health.
And when you think about what permanent solutions would be, what kind of activities or programs might be happening in that kind of ideal state?
It's everything from, you know, the understanding of your and the leading of your own therapeutic interventions, to housing, to addressing the family systems that may have been part of why you got to the place that you're in. It's the work, the employment element of it, training that carries people beyond just the halfway house.
So more connectivity to resources and programs that fix real problems long term.
And at the leadership level, I see the opportunity for cooperatives amongst people who want to provide those services. It's tough to run these businesses by yourself, and if the model of profit is what we're trying to disrupt, cooperatives is an opportunity for us to share the responsibility, share the gains, share all of it.
Great, thank you. What else does the room envision? Yeah.
That vision is really admirable. I would like to take that as maybe a blueprint that says community corrections and halfway houses instead, and this is more of a value, being a place that we have to go to prove to the community that we're ready to return to the community, but a placement of interest or choice by folks that touch the system. Is that should community corrections be the alternative to DOC, or should DOC be the alternative to community-based services? And maybe we need to flip that script a little bit so that when they understand the menu of services and the expectation of outcomes by the end of a placement, folks will be raising their hand and say, we'd rather start there, near our families, near where we're going to work, our educational and vocational resources, near where we're going to end up housed, instead of going to DOC. I'm sure DJ would agree that even helping in that way from a bed stress standpoint, where we're kind of flipping the script, for me, that's the grand vision for the entire state. And with those kind of statements, we walk towards that blueprint, we'll really be doing something profound through this committee.
The original intent of community corrections, when it first started, was to return that individual back to the community where he's from, to reintegrate that individual back into his family, into his job, and whatever it takes for him to be successful. That was the original intent of community corrections. They were small programs all over Denver, and they would return to their part of town, and their families would be involved. They would have jobs. At one time, it was phase one, where they would start them. They would start them working. They would start the treatment. They would move on to phase two, and we would just carry on. And then it would be a continuum after that program into the non-residential program, the outpatient program. All that has stopped from the original intent, because it got so big that now they just get people and they just put them wherever there's empty beds. But it used to be the profit. I don't know where the profit came from, because there's never been any profit. I mean, it took me 50 years to even buy the facilities I have. Where they found profit, and these companies have tried to buy me, but they didn't see no profit in me. So,
So Manny, if I may reframe you to the future
Yeah.
state, I'm hearing you say that maybe the original intent of being connected to community, smaller and not.
and more
for-profit.
treatment.
More treatment.
More treatment.
Okay, thank you.
I think a little bit of what I'm feeling Manny was reflecting on, and it's the geography, the location of facilities. I think in learning where facilities are and how many are in one single council district, or that they are only in industrial locations, felt so disconnected from humanity that stuck out as a huge problem for me. So the geographic distribution, but that connection to other neighborhoods, to services, to pipelines, but geography, I think, becomes a big fit for me.
I hear that reflected in, right, almost everything we've heard, the connectivity to community, to neighborhoods, to services, not warehouses that are far on the outskirts. What else? Our future ideal state, you have no barriers at this point in time.
I could add, I think one of the other pieces was, and I'm absolutely learning in this space about corrections as a system, but learning how placement takes place felt problematic for me. And whether or not that can be thought through in a different way in the future of where is the likelihood of success and what is that based on? And because Denver is an increasingly difficult place to start out again, to start anew, to establish your life again. And that becomes, I think, a really challenging expectation to place at someone's feet when they're just leaving an institution for a long period of time. And that felt very unfair.
Yeah. In an ideal state, what types of considerations would be part of the placement process?
Whether that city, that location is ideal for where they need to be. I remember a woman that we met at Williams who works in Golden, but she's at Williams, so she's spending 3 hours a day on the bus commuting to her job. So what becomes better location designation for folks as they're trying to establish lives?
Right, so consideration to the individual needs of someone above all.
Reentry starts at placement instead of the end of placement.
Yeah.
Right, so think rethinking placement.
I'm sorry, Hassan, I was just, hopefully a friendly amendment. Reentry starts at placement instead of at the end of placement. Being mindful of where that game plan is going to take somebody. That's what I was hearing you say.
I also feel like the treatment, we found out through the course of all this that there are specific providers. There are only 2 providers really that get contracted with for therapeutic services. And I feel like that is probably not appropriate. There's so many providers in the state and in the city that there shouldn't be any kind of limitations around who we use or who we work with to tailor a program for every single individual. So really utilizing the services that are in our community and connecting residents to community organizations. Most of these facilities are not really connecting to embedded organizations. And so I would like to see residents being truly a part of the communities that they're in.
It's great. DJ, Michelle?
No, I think Jill mentioned a good point, that we're recognizing in the department, and that's, the reality is we have been strangled by a capacity issue. When you consider capacity, community corrections is absolutely a component of that. But I think if you break that barrier, capacity should be within the community, meaning that people aren't stifled in these environments, and they are in the community. But while they're in their community, you're able to effectively address some of the significant barriers that that are allowing them to acclimate and be a productive community member, from substance abuse to trauma to all the things that we know very well. I don't know what the right environment is. I'm not sure of community corrections. I know that I'll speak for us. I mean, in a cell is not typically the best environment for that. I think it's not for the right, for the appropriate person it is, but for the most part, in order to address all of those, you have to develop an environment where somebody feels comfortable getting those services, obtaining those services. And I'm not sure what that environment looks like. So if I had a magic wand, I'd make that environment across the board in all the communities.
There's an opportunity to reimagine the environment as a place that someone would find that meets their needs, that's helpful, that's useful, that's connected to the community they want to go back to.
That they will come to.
And that they will come to. Michelle, from your experience, what's your vision of a new, different way forward?
Well, I would ditto some of the things that you said, because I think definitely the community needs to be more involved and not such a massive warehouse of just rules that people have to go through. I think that without employment there, because employment is the key to success through community corrections. And so, I mean, for people that have done a lot of time, community corrections is an absolute necessity. It is the way that people really acculate back to society. But if you're there and you don't have employment, it's gonna be that vicious cycle. You're going back again, because you have to be successful, and that is employment. So I would envision some place that has to have the training there available for people to be placed in employment, and then, I mean, not just housed there, and I owe $175 soon as I walk through the door, but I don't have a job. So, I mean, and then next week I owe $350 and I still don't have a job. I mean, that's to me ridiculous of us starting out community corrections and you owe this money immediately as soon as you walk in the door, but you don't have any steps to take to advance to do that. So I would envision that first thing you're gonna do is you have to learn the rules, of course. You have to know everything, but you've gotta have that placement. You've gotta have employment. You've gotta have the training. The housing goes with it, but to be successful, it's not gonna work without that.
Community corrections can be a place that sets you up to advance.
Absolutely.
We heard from some.
Well, ideally, I'd like to see a culture shift where when people think about public safety and improving public safety, it doesn't always go to the default, which is usually more policing, more incarceration, longer sentences. The truth of the matter is that public safety is improved, the public community is involved in the process. That's where public safety will improve. I actually, I'm fighting. At this point, I'm laughing like you're smiling, but yes. And that's because in the environment that I work in, the whole provider-recipient power dynamic, we reject that. Okay, we choose to partner with our folks instead, and help them get their needs met. So when we talk about ideal, I think we have to start looking at public safety through a different lens. If it was about policing and corrections, then the public would be safe now. We know that's not the case. Things that have been in place have not improved public safety. And there are some things that are being done now that I'm encouraged about, and I think we should go on. For instance, let me just say, most folks that are living in community corrections, it's called inmate status. And the likelihood is that many of the folks that they interact with on a daily basis also see it as a continuation of incarceration. And most people consider incarceration leads over into community corrections. The building healthy kind of approach to people who are actually damaged in many ways by the things that took them to prison, and in many cases by their experiences inside. And so a healing environment for me is ideal. And that's the kind of thing that's going to take a lot of different elements. And I believe that a lot of them are going to be coming from community, people who are skilled at this, invested and passionate about helping folks, get back to family, find it.
So, thank you for pointing out how this is part of the larger conversation about a culture shift around public safety and what that means and who's involved. You used the word healing environment, and I'm just curious if you tell us a little more about what that looks like.
Well, if I walk down a flight of steps and halfway down I trip and I fell all the way down, broke my leg, obviously compound fractured bone sticking out the side. Well, if I kind of stretched it out, lined it up, wrapped a couple of ace bandages around two by fours on either side of my leg, the likelihood is if I managed the infection, it would probably heal. But nobody should be surprised if I limp the rest of my life. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about human beings who've been damaged by life's circumstances and experiences. And, when I'm talking about healing, I'm talking about this being done properly in a safe environment, with empathy, with compassion, with understanding about a person's journey and needs, and not something that's regimented, not something that's mandated, not something that someone doesn't really feel is a part of their job, because they see their job as to contain as opposed to support in real ways. And I'm not saying that this is universal throughout the systems we're talking about, but there's enough in these environments to harm.
Yeah.
And that's just the opposite of what's needed.
Thank you.
I would like to see this, I think piggybacks off what others have said, is a system that really allows us to tailor what we, working in conjunction with that offender, whoever that person is, to tailor what kind of a program they get. When we think about sentencing people, we're like, we used to say, oh, you should go to Pier 1, or oh, you should go to this program. And there were just, a handful of them, and boom, sort of cookie cutter people into things. And to your point, these are human beings who have very unique and very different needs, and they really need tailored sort of things put together, treatment and other things, resources for them. So I'd like to see a system that really allows us to do that and gives us as judges a lot of flexibility in terms of how we sentence people to get them the kind of help that they need. The other thing that I think is important, this again is something that I've heard other people say, but I think community accessibility, you almost think about like pop-up shops. There needs to be things in the community that are safe places where we have people out in the community who may be community corrections participants, where they can just go and they can get help, and they know that they can go there. They don't have to go to a facility, they don't have to be warehoused, something like that. But I think some kind of system that has things accessible in the community where they can go when they need help, as to help them transition into, not being part of the criminal justice system, I think would be fabulous. And I don't know that we really have something quite like that.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes. I'd like to hear from everyone. Yeah, so Greg?
So John, I just want to underscore a couple things that have been said, but I think they're really important. This conversation about capacity. I'd like to reimagine the system where we're not dependent upon capacity. Community corrections has grown over the years solely on the percent of prison population or the percent of beds. And through that process, I think sometimes we've lost our way and lost that quality that people are talking about. So I think it was DJ that mentioned it, but I'd like to think of a system that didn't focus so much on capacity relief. Sana started to talk about something that we need to really put out there is the staffing of the people that are part of these facilities are really client centered, and that they have success of the client as that person is moving their way through. I think it is a difficult situation sometimes to balance public safety, accountability, extension of incarceration with client success, but we have think about what the future could look like there, because we're missing the mark. And then lastly, the ability for us to connect with the community for decades needs to be fixed. You know, my good friend in the audience who coined the phrase, where is community and community correction? We really need to think about that. And we tried, and we engage in a way that's not been effective. And I think the sunset partner, and maybe that's the word we should think about.
So, big themes, thank you for pulling out around connecting to community, humanizing and tailoring these services, rethinking how and what the purpose, what are community corrections, what is the purpose and what is it here to do? Wondering if you'll unpack a little bit for this group, what you mean when you say not dependent on capacity. Can you reframe that to then what?
Explain
Yeah.
how.
Explain and maybe an alternate road.
Sure, and certainly Director Tony can help if I categorize this incorrectly, but, you know, oftentimes the way that community corrections is funded, or not oftentimes, the way it is funded is based upon a percent of the prison population or utilization. We have utilization targets that we should provide services to X percent of the folks in custody. So it's that capacity model versus a qualitative model. And then every few years, there's this demand for improved outcomes, but we've been focused so much on capacity, we lose our way with the outcomes.
So a system focused on good outcomes.
I'd like to circle back if we could to, Candi mentioned cooperatives.
Yeah.
But I'd like for you to expand on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are a lot of barriers for people who have been in corrections to coming back to corrections and working with people. And so, and even for small organizations, there are barriers to being able to serve at the scale that we need. And I think we put a lot of parameters around services based on your ability to serve at scale. And so I think cooperatives are a place where you can have somebody who does gender responsive treatment. You can have people who do different things. They have their own niche, but they work together to provide those wraparound opportunities. They share the cost of administration. And in an organization, you know, that can be what you spend most of your time on if you're a small org. And so in order to eliminate not only those barriers for people coming out to come back, but also to eliminate the organizational barriers for people who want to have that niche and provide that direct service. I think that we should have like mentorship, kind of the way you get an AA sponsor. You should have people who have been through this, who can walk with you, navigate with you, but those people aren't necessarily going to be able to run an entire business. And so that's a place where they can plug into a cooperative model. And even the mental health and wellness, you know, there are people who teach yoga classes that might want to be a part of some trauma-informed care in the health and wellness arena, but don't have full-scale businesses to deal with the government level contracting that takes up a lot of time. So that's kind of what I mean. Does that explain?
Yes, yes, look, but I'm actually, I was hoping that I could come up with a clear vision. People were asking, what do you want to do? And I don't know about anybody else, I didn't come up with a vision in my head about exactly what should come.
A consortium.
You know, my hope is to find that in this room and in these conversations.
We have kind of what's, we have kind of a consortium with independent house. We have federal halfway houses. We have TDAT programs, which are programs that for clients that have problems with drug and alcohol, which go in treatment. We have programs that are heavy equipment programs for people that come out of prison and they get the heavy equipment jobs. We have outpatient programs. We have mental health programs. We have dual diagnosis programs. We have all these different programs at Independence House. We have approximately 1,700 people in treatment. And all our people sit at one table. We have directors at all these programs. And we talk about all the different ways that we can all work together. We can't, of course, because they're federal clients or they're state clients, we can't use all the same things. But I suggested this to Greg and them, is that we set up a consortium of all these programs, and we do all these services for a guy that comes out and he needs treatment. It took him 20, 30 years to get to where he's at. And you can't heal him or treat him in 4 to 6 months. You can't do it. That used to be my argument with community corrections. At the VA hospital, we used to treat Vietnam vets for 13 months in order to get them to change. Because it took them 20 years to get to that point where they were at a Veterans Administration hospital and they had problems.
And in the interest of time, can I just
Okay.
sum up your vision?
All right.
Which would be more treatment similar to more options?
Consortium.
A consortium, so more options, and I think, Candy, what you're saying is structurally a co-op model, increase the types, kinds, and quality of treatment services available to people.
Yeah, and it's basically that.
A
It's,
consortium.
it's the consortium with the ability to build capacity in newer and smaller organizations.
Thank you. Now, we're going to move on, but I just want to give Jane and one last chance.
Our vision is free to see how our citizens come out of the Department of Corrections and integrate into a community. Number one, I'm gonna go to the negative, that may not want to be there, including family members. And number one, and then number two, it goes back to the point of individuals coming out of community corrections after having spent a number of years there. It's my belief that it was difficult for a person that was incarcerated for 5 years or more to adjust. So there's and I know that there are people that come out of community corrections or even while in community corrections that have family members begging, let me have them. And so there's parts of the system that you have it on the board here somewhere.
There's some improvements in the placement process.
So I really think that if we look at improvement in the placement process, not only in our situation here in Denver, but going even higher into the Department of Corrections. I know that they have programs in there that we're stepping out of bounds, but I really think that needs to be where it looks at.
Thank you, DJ.
This will be real quick on that. But I did want to make a point, I think, to Hassan's point.
Yeah.
You know, when you have inmate status, and we call it community corrections, it shapes the way you deal with your environment and the individuals in it. And I think maybe one of the things we need to consider is possibly rebranding them.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does reentry mean? What is, you know, what do you call it?
So the shift. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
Bunch of
One
chatters,
thing,
yes.
not to reiterate anything, we're gonna be watched by the victims community as well.
Yeah.
And a system of services that can promote, which we can do with community-based services, restorative programming. We know that these folks are saying, for the most part, wow, repairs here. We can't do it in a lot of the way the models are shaped right now. We need to be able to, I think we need to be able to satisfy all the stakeholders, including the victims' community, so they say, this is something that works for us because we're seeing the change that we need out of these people. So maybe that's a statement that's kind of Pollyanna, but I think it's fundamentally important that we at least keep that on our front porch as we talk.
I have noted, thank you for bringing that forward. 30 seconds, what hasn't been said?
I haven't said anything, and
Yeah.
I think that community corrections is but one piece of an overall system.
Yeah.
And that we need to have better continuity in that system. What happens at the Department of Corrections doesn't necessarily feed into what happens at community corrections, which doesn't necessarily feed into aftercare. So, I mean, you talked, Michelle, about jobs. There's not a lot of job training in the department. I mean, it isn't just what they can do. And so when they come to community corrections doesn't have the capability, except for the heavy equipment program, that's like the best thing ever. And then when they go out of community corrections, it's sort of like they're just gone. I mean, there aren't necessarily services, there's some reentry programs, but I think we need to, in an ideal world, kind of try to put those things together and not move community corrections out as its own little thing, because it's not.
Just adding on to that, the entrepreneurship piece, there's a lot of barriers that we throw in front of the residents to not have their own businesses and to not be self-reliant.
Been used to, and so not just to thrust you out into a home setting where you're not comfortable and you don't know what it's like to live in a home environment again, but to get you to that point, 3-4 months down the road where you could go into a home setting where you do have less people, and it's more of a quantity-based system versus, quality-based system versus quantity.
And I think that kind of echoes a lot of what Michelle said about that graduated. Well, thank you. I want to move on because that's what we've got to do, but I think that I'm going to come back to this conversation over and over again as we get bogged down in some of the challenges that we'll face in putting these visions into action. So thank you for this conversation. I think it sets a good tone. I'm going to turn the floor over to
Andrew Webb.
Are you guys ready? And the purpose of this conversation is really to start providing some context within which we can make these changes and recommendations. So thank you. If you haven't guessed, I'm Tina Axelrod. This is Andrew Webb. I'm the zoning administrator for this. It's a privilege tonight to come before you and start unraveling a little bit of the mystery behind how community corrections facilities are regulated in the city of Denver. This is just one piece of a very large puzzle. But we're here tonight to talk about zoning. So maybe it helps just to take a beat to talk about what zoning is and why it exists and what it does well, and perhaps what it doesn't do so well, to provide a little bigger picture than just what we're doing specifically. So zoning is a set of laws that set out how land in the city of Denver should be used. And in addition, how buildings should be built, where should they be placed on the site, how big they should be, how close to each other. And on the use side, it's more about compatibility of uses. What uses play well together next to each other? What uses perhaps should be segregated from another type of use because it could have an adverse impact on that other use if allowed to be close together. So zoning at its heart when it comes to use is more about bringing together or separating out, and it does it pretty well. Zoning does very well in playing with geography. I heard a lot of comments here tonight about where community corrections facilities in the future should be placed in the city of Denver and how spread out they should be. So zoning does a good job in taking a business use or a residential use or an institutional use and saying where it should be in the city. And we do that by saying you're allowed, we take the entire city of Denver and we chop it up into zone districts. And in each district, we say what uses are allowed and what your buildings can be and where they can be and how tall. So it can be a helpful tool in addressing the geography of where community correction facilities will be or should be allowed in the city of Denver. We're going to talk a little bit about where it is today. You guys have the fun job of looking at that and helping us understand how far that is from your future vision of what it should be tomorrow. Okay? So that's kind of my big philosophical start. I'm going to step back and let Andrew take over, and I'm here to help answer questions when he's done. So thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Tina. Again, I am Andrew Webb. I work also for Community Planning and Development on updates to the zoning code, rezoning of properties, that sort of thing. I'm working, among other things, on a project to update the zoning code's group living regulations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that project and where that's headed recently. First, I'm just going to walk through just a very brief overview of how community corrections, this particular use is regulated by zoning in Denver. So currently, this use is considered a residential care use within the zoning code's group living category. That's essentially everything that's not a conventional household in Pacific County. Community corrections facilities are permitted in these zone districts that you see here, so industrial districts and some of the downtown zone districts. There are several additional use limitations besides saying what what zone districts the use is allowed in. The zoning code also establishes use limitations and buffering requirements. So for community corrections specifically, there are 1,500-foot buffers from a school or from a residential zone district, and that's important. That includes, that just means where the zone line begins, and that includes multi-unit, higher, multi-family residential, that sort of thing. This type of use is not allowed within 1,500 feet of any zone district where residential uses are permitted. And then because it is also considered a large residential care facility, an additional layer of buffering is required. You're not allowed to have one large residential care facility within 2,000 feet of another, and you're not allowed to have more than two within a 4,000-foot radius. And so we get into some maps that kind of illustrate the impact of those regulations.
Excuse me, sir, your name again?
Sure, it's Andrew Webb.
Andrew, is the idea behind, let's say, the 1,500 feet, is the idea that could provide some sort of safety for the residences that are outside of that 1,500 feet?
I believe that was the intent when those regulations were developed.
So then they must have thought that people didn't have the capacity to walk 1,500 feet if they had it.
That may have been the case. I believe those regulations are dating back to the 1990s and they've amended and they've evolved a little bit since then. I will note that Denver is unique in this particular requirement. We've looked at a lot of other peer cities and how they regulate this particular kind of use and large res care uses in general, and have found that most other cities similar in size to Denver do not have these kind of specific buffers from schools and residential zone districts. So it's something to consider.
Can I get clarification? We call it a large residential care facility, but it can't be near residential?
Actually, other large res care facilities can, but yes, you're correct that this particular use is not allowed to be within the residential district.
Can you go back to your slide for just a second? So it can't be close to another residential care facility. Would that
That's right.
include things like senior living, assisted living?
No. It includes things like shelters, large special care facilities, so like what we might think of as like a residential treatment facility, and other uses along those lines. It does not include nursing homes or
Not to get over our skis too much, but there's a lot of discussion about small residential strategies.
That was the reason that we ended up here.
We'll talk a little bit about that, yeah.
There is it's large, before you get into that, it sounds like.
So right now, there is no breakdown for community corrections facilities. No matter how many people they serve, they still have to abide by these same regulations. But we're working on a project now that's looking at amending and updating these regulations, and that's why we're very interested in this conversation, because I think there may be some opportunities to look at how perhaps smaller facilities could be allowed in more places with more flexible regulations.
I think there may be two. We have two councilwomen sitting at this table that, what I'm getting from this, and I know you guys didn't come up with the zoning, you're trying to explain it to us, and I appreciate that. But from what I'm getting is that these restrictions, these guidelines were basically fear-driven. It doesn't matter if they were done in 1990 or 1890, it still serves the same purpose. And so I'm saying, That's what I'm
I
getting
would
from
certainly
this.
agree that the distances from schools and residential zone districts are based on some perception or understanding of what would make a community correctional facility safe for the public. Layering on any judgment on that,
No, I
that's my
understand.
best surmise of how it came to be. The other standards that Andrew talked about
Mhm.
regarding distances between similar facilities or the same facilities was trying more to the anti-saturation or spreading them out more or incentivizing them to go into different parts of the city. That's one idea that was out there, but of course with community corrections facility, you have that playing against a very small number of zone districts in which they're allowed. And they don't, those two ideas don't play well together often, as you'll see in a minute.
So because of the current regulations, there is very little land left, and we'll show a map here in a second that illustrates this. Very little land left where new facilities can be established. And the land that is available is in areas of the city where this type of use is already, that there are quite a few other similar residential care uses, so where there is a concentration of those uses. Additionally, a lot of the facilities that exist today predate some of these regulations, and so they are at varying levels of non-conformance with the zoning code. That's either completely non-conforming, which means they were legally established but would no longer be permitted in the zone district that they're in now because the zoning code has since been amended or because their property was rezoned at some point. Or they're what we call compliant, which means they would be permitted in the zone district, but they're not meeting one of the use limitations. And most commonly, that is the proximity to a residential zone district. This map shows where current facilities are and the land that is available for the establishment of new facilities. It is shown in kind of that tan color. The red is the 2,000-foot buffer from which, any res care facility has to be separated by that 2,000-foot buffer. And then the kind of lighter gray buffer is the 4,000-foot buffer. So where the lighter gray is over the tan areas, an analysis would have to be done as to whether there's another large residential care facility in that area. And if so, then a new community corrections or other large res care facility would not be able to be established there. So as you can see, there's just a few kind of slivers of land available for the establishment of these facilities right now. This slide goes through kind of the status of existing facilities. I'm not going to linger on it, but I have printed copies of the presentation that I'll leave with you if you all want to spend some additional time digesting it. But as you can see, we have four conforming facilities in the city, which means that they would be allowed in their current zone district and they are meeting use limitations. All the others have some additional challenges, either they're not conforming or they're conforming uses.
Or PUD.
And that one is a conforming use because the PUD does allow that use. The zoning code also has limitations on the size of facilities. As you can see here in the INX zone district, which is a mixed-use industrial district. It's an industrial district that allows residential uses essentially. And in the downtown districts, they're limited to 40 residents, and there's a density or space in a facility requirement that originally was put into the zoning code based on a state standard that has since been amended, and so the zoning code standards are somewhat out of date. In the IB and kind of heavier industrial zone districts, you can have up to 60 residents and up to 120 residents in some limited cases, as you can see here, based on your affiliation with the public safety. So, as I mentioned up front, I am the project manager for a team of staff and an advisory committee working on updates to the group living regulations in the code. So that includes all the group living uses, which range from shelters to assisted living facilities, community corrections, and learn through the project uses that are not really addressed in the code, things like cooperatives and tiny home villages. That project has a 50-member advisory committee made up of facility operators, residents and guests, neighborhood representatives, and other stakeholders, including several representatives from operators of several local community corrections facilities. Since we began this project in March of 2018, we've met over 30 times and have done site tours and tried to better understand these facilities. We do have a website that addresses at the end of this presentation that publishes the dates of meetings, and these meetings are open to the public if people are interested in coming. We expect the next meetings for this particular topic, community corrections, to be scheduled for late October and November. We're still looking at dates right now, but when they are pinned down, we will actually publish them on the project website. We do expect that the basic premise of the changes that we'll propose to the zoning code will be ready for public meetings and review by late this year or early next year, followed by the formal amendments to the zoning code going to the city council, planning board, and ultimately the city council for adoption.
Could you hold that panel up for a minute? Because I'm sitting here looking at a pretty robust group of folks, 50 and 30 meetings over the course of a year and a half. And you're gonna come with some suggestions maybe in another 6 months or so?
That's right, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of where things are headed with the specific to community corrections here.
Yeah, I'm just wishing that we had the comfort of that kind of time and that kind of flexibility. We don't.
Understood.
Well, one of the things we might add to this is that when these zoning laws were passed, you could buy one of these facilities for $250,000. Now these things start at $2.5 million. So that's the difference. You couldn't even buy, not today, you couldn't even buy one unless you have at least $2.5 million. That's changed.
Have there ever been any court challenges to this zoning? I mean, we know the racist, classist roots of zoning in general, but have there ever been any lawsuits in Denver on this specific piece of our zoning code?
Not that I'm aware of. I know the history pretty well. That's not to say I know everything, but I think I would know about any lawsuits regarding the group living or the community corrections facility specifically. Not that I'm aware of.
So these are the problems that the community corrections specific subgroup have identified currently with the zoning code. Generally speaking, that it's very challenging to add capacity for a number of reasons. There's limited space, as I in the previous slide, for new facilities. Many of the existing uses, because of their compliant or non-conforming status, are unable to expand, even if they have the space to do so for having more residents or expanded programs. The current vehicle parking requirements exceed the demand, especially for uses that typically only require employee parking, and that the population we talked about a couple slides back are outdated and need to be. So the community corrections subgroup of the advisory committee has been looking at several recommendations for amending the code. Those include allowing the use potentially in more zone districts. So far, we've done some analysis of what that might mean in mixed-use zone districts on commercial corridors, where such as like Colorado or Evans, where you have access to transit, and this would also potentially allow for a wider kind of geographic distribution of some of these facilities. One thing we'll note here is that without addressing the buffers, the 1,500-foot buffers, adding any additional zone districts, because residential uses in zone districts make up so much of the city, adding new zone districts won't have much of an effect in terms of adding more land, unless we can also at the same time reconsider the current buffers. We're also looking at reducing the off-street parking requirements and revisiting the caps on the number of residents. And one of the things that we're hearing from the advisory committee, and we're excited to hear more from all of you as well as you are working through your deliberations here, is how smaller facilities might work, and whether smaller facilities actually as a business model can be done, and whether allowing a smaller facility in the zoning code with more flexible regulations would actually incentivize the establishment of smaller facilities. So in terms of next steps, we would really appreciate your input. This is a public process, and we're happy to answer your questions and take your comments anytime. Contact information there at the bottom. As I mentioned, we'll have another couple rounds of community corrections specific meetings to talk about zoning coming up in late October and November, and we'll publish those on the project website. And we're really interested in hearing from potential new operators as they're looking at what these new business models might look like through this transition, what they need in terms of zoning to be able to offer this use.
I have two questions. One, if you can describe for us the moratorium that we've just ended in 2018, just so we all understand what that was. And two, how we're anticipating, because I don't think anything that we envision happening really happens without changes in zoning. And so how are we marrying what this group recommends with what your group recommends?
I'll take the second question first, if I could. We will be closely following this process to better understand as you all kind of come to some recommendations and decisions on the types of new operators that the city might want to transition to, so that we can ensure that that whatever updates are made to the zoning code actually work for those. And certainly we'll ask for proactively for your feedback as well. We're happy to meet with operators anytime and hear their thoughts.
And remember, we do zoning, we don't do human services or programming. And really, zoning is not the place to incentivize new types of models of providing services or ownership or collectives or collaboratives, but it can get out of the way in terms of the size of these cities and where they go. I think those are two areas where we hope we're fairly copacetic with this group and dealing with some of those challenges that we've been living with for the last 30 years and still not get in the way or be counterproductive to a lot of other good work this group will continue doing. As far as the moratorium you asked about, so that was adopted by City Council in 2008. And it was a 10-year moratorium on the establishment of any new community correction facilities in the city of Denver. I would actually look to Manny for a bit of help with the history of how or why that came about, because I don't know either.
I can actually speak to
Or
that.
Greg.
Yeah, so in 2006, the Department of Safety worked with City Council to expand the number of beds in certain facilities that were zoned for community corrections use. Because at that time, we were out of beds or out of capacity, and we needed additional bed space. And we still have the same zoning challenges that were presented here, very little acreage to site new facilities. So the decision that was made was to expand capacity from that 60-bed cap up to 120 in 3 sites and 1 site at a capacity of 90 beds. During that process, there was a lot of neighborhood concern and just general concern about what that would do to the integrity of the neighborhood by having more residents or expanded use. And so they wanted to have a moratorium to kind of evaluate that. Unfortunately, there was never a study asked for or any official document to reach a conclusion, but the history of that is related to that process from 2006 to 2008.
It just froze time, basically.
They wanted to model the residential areas.
They wanted.
They wanted to model the residential areas. So
Well, they were already out of the residential.
Yeah,
that was
It wasn't about that, it was about they didn't want them all in certain neighborhoods.
Well, the first time they didn't all want them all in Capitol Hill, they were all in Capitol Hill. So they moved them out, they went to North Denver, they went to South Denver. And then after that, they were in the residential area. Then they didn't want them in the residential area, so they took them to the industrial areas. And then that's when, they said no more, that was enough.
It was a trade-off. It was, you can have more beds if you don't put them where we don't think they ought to be. And that was why the moratorium came in.
And it wasn't what concerned zoning, but it was the part of, you needed more beds in order to exist because of the per diem.
And it was
the same time we mentioned phase one, and that was out of the county jail, and that shut down too. So that was part of the equation of getting more
A
business.
small facility with the per diem it is now could not exist. We have a small facility of 40, but the only reason we can exist is because our per diem is double because it's a specialized treatment center. But that's not important. That was the reason why they got bigger, because they needed more funds in order to exist.
Quick context check-in with zoning. So that group living zoning group, it was not designed specifically to address this issue. This is a small slice of what it was emerging to discuss. It was more about addressing the fact that in Denver, more than 2 unrelated adults can't live together. That's technically illegal. And with the right cost of living in Denver, we were trying to explore other options of how do we reuse these big mansions? How do we reuse these spaces so that it's more affordable for people to live? And this was a small slice of it that didn't have the same sense of urgency behind it that it does now. And so I don't think there's any barriers to expediting this conversation. I think we actually should expedite it and shoot for as soon as possible with that meeting in October.
If I can comment on that, Councilwoman Ortega brought up that very point last night in the group living for community corrections committee meeting about, is there a need to maybe pull community corrections zoning out of the group living project and take it on its own timeline? Because if people noticed in that one slide deck that recommendations wouldn't even go before city council until the first quarter of 2020. Even if past changes were made, we're well into 2020 before anything can be done. And we're on a June 2020 deadline, that's going to be really aggressive. One thing I want to check in on is Kaylin is shared, co-shares this on at 7:30. Are people comfortable if we do for another 15, 20 minutes to get through the agenda, or do we need a break?
Let's do it. All right, so I guess we would do
That's
it. Any last questions?
That's one thing we probably should decide before we leave here is of these meetings. We're only gonna have 6 to 8. I was pleased that this one started at 90 minutes, but that may very well not be enough for us to really do what we gotta do going forward. So that's something we probably should decide before we close up.
So we'll take a few minutes to go through some logistics and agenda setting for the next meeting and figure that out. Do we have last questions or additional conversation around zoning at this point?
One question you may not have the answer to is you did your collateral research in other communities and found that there weren't these restrictions. They also do research to look at, I presume, the myth about placing these things in residential communities. And, you know, it's so much a property value question as well as the stuff that Hassan brought up, right? Kind of interweave.
Not specific to this use, but we certainly have pulled together a lot of research on residential care facility placement in general, and examining the beliefs that they impact property values and that sort of thing.
So we've looked at recovery homes
Exactly.
as, for example, large recovery homes or that type of model.
My hypothesis, we should not be concerned as homeowners that the impact is as negative as we might think. Is that true?
If you have research from your office that you can share with us.
I'm just hypothesizing.
Oh, you're hypothesizing.
I was hoping you would say yes.
The data tend to show that there are not property value impacts to placement of.
Fair enough.
So large group
that's what I'm
homes,
more
there's been some literature search and done between some city council offices actually in the past and our staff that have, found research out there that large group living homes, not necessarily community corrections facilities, do not have the feared impact on property values that sometimes get part of the conversation.
Thank you. That's all.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Concerning the community engagement piece, it sounds like there's been some research done around the potential impacts, regarding all of these issues. Has there been any community engagement concerning where we're at, willingness of these communities to adopt, some of these thought processes that we're talking about today?
We did do a round of public meetings when the first phase of the project ended, the kind of the problem identification phase to highlight what some of the issues were. We are still in the process of kind of formalizing some kind of draft recommendations to move forward. So we will be taking those out to public meetings, but we have not done so yet. We have not formally yet. I mean, we certainly, we are always happy to, we go to R&O meetings and other types of events upon request to discuss these things, but we have not proposed any changes or potential amendments yet to the public, but will. And I will say, generally speaking, there is the same kind of concerns I think still exist in the public sphere that people are worried about these types of uses in or near residential neighborhoods. So it'll be a challenging conversation.
So Andrew, may I ask, what do we have to do to separate community corrections from this thing like buyout? What do we have to do? Tell the council from them?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the question.
The question was, what would they have to do to expedite this part of the process?
For community corrections.
To pull out the thread of community corrections and take it forward with changes.
Yes.
Apart from and faster than the rest of them.
Absolutely.
So we just did it for tiny home villages on a temporary base that are allowed to be on land for 1 to 4 years, starting council next week. There's a balancing act, right? I think part of the discussion with Councilwoman Ortega last night was how interconnected a lot of these pieces regarding group living are. And if you take one out, have you lost that kind of ability to look at things holistically? The temporary tiny home villages were really unique in that it was its own thing and wouldn't really impact anything else. And there was an immediate need seen for that type of shelter to hit the ground sooner. We would take direction, however, but these were some of the factors to consider. Because it will, if we pull that out, it will stop work on the rest of it for 5 to 6 months at least. And we have a lot of pressure to deal with large group living, the definition of a household.
Maybe doing 18 months already.
Right, what is the
We
barrier
only have
there?
a few.
What's that?
What is the barrier there? Why is that one taking so long? Where are we at with that?
With what?
With the full process for group living, it has been one of the longer processes.
Well, I'll let Andrew.
What is?
Yeah, it has been a very long process, I think longer than we expected. And it is a classic example of kind of peeling back the layers of the onion, and we've realized that all of these uses are very complicated, very controversial, and the process of repeated meetings just to come to agreement on what the actual problem is and get consensus within the committee on that took much longer than we expected, and so.
And then we stopped
And then we stopped for a while for the
to do the tiny home, because
villages,
we
yeah.
only have finite number of people who do this, so they had to stop work on the bigger one for 5 to 6 months, shift to tiny home villages, do that work, and now we're sort of picking up momentum and trying to get momentum going again.
It can happen.
Yeah.
It can happen though.
Yeah, it's definitely a path we would need.
So if you go back to the slide with the timeline, it looks like you have an October meeting and nothing until the first quarter. So I feel like if we expedite, we're not canceling anything that would happen for group living. We're just doing more things in between.
Just to clarify, that's next meeting's on the community corrections topic. We also have
That's one
meetings
subgroup.
on shelters, transitional housing, special care homes, some of those emerging uses like cooperatives, that sort of thing. So there are multiple subgroup meetings happening in parallel here.
And then
And
the full.
it sounds like there's a challenge with defining the problem because there are so many subsets involved.
We need to do it comprehensively. It really works best if you look at the whole category of non-household living together because we've learned, as we said, how interconnected they are. You change the definition of one, you gotta change the definition of all of them and make it all play together. It's really difficult to do it one by one in isolation.
Will they come to council as different bills for the different pieces?
The intent is to have them all come together, and I'll just highlight one reason, one example of why, how they're so intertwined. The 2,000-foot and 4,000-foot buffers impact community corrections along with other buffer requirements specific to that use, but they also impact all the other residential care uses too. So if we're going to, to change those, we need to make sure that we are assessing the impact of that change on all residential care uses.
Andrew, is what you're showing us here how the zoning code
That's
is
right.
organized?
It is, yes.
These are all the group
All the
living
group living
uses
uses.
that we have an eye on for this project, plus the new ones that.
So
that,
community
you know,
corrections, any side depends on what's set under large, which depends on what's set under res care.
That's
which
right.
Then is under group living.
Exactly, it all kind of nests, basically.
Can you provide us a matrix, spreadsheet that shows us each of these with the elements that are relevant, whether that's distance requirements, cap on residents, those pieces, so that we can see them all in comparison? Because right now we're talking about increasing the group living cap to 8, and that's controversial at 8.
That's increasing the size of the household.
Right, the household to 8, and so.
And that's, by the way, that's not official.
Right, right.
It's open to discussion. That was an advisory committee discussion that we took and kind of played out a little bit with IMC and others.
And
That is
that's
not
felt-
unofficial.
Right, right, and that's felt like the most controversial piece, but that doesn't deal with what we're trying to deal with here.
Well, it depends on what small community correction facility operations look like in the future. I don't know if it's 8, but
What about your ordinances that you added to the zoning, where you have all the other requirements for one case manager for 20, what other, you have to have community advisory board, all these other requirements that you added on to these ordinances.
I appreciate the compliment, but I didn't look at it.
Well, you're Denver.
I think maybe that might be a good topic for future conversations, what other regulatory schemes are in place. I think you're referring to a section of the revised municipal code that was born out of ordinance.
Community corrections meeting.
So we could talk more about
It
how
came
that.
from the public hearings and
Yeah.
after they added the zoning, the neighborhood one and all these other things.
So in the interest of time,
BCJ,
we are going to end this here. However, Andrew, or how may we communicate with you moving forward?
I have, so my contact information is in this presentation, and I have printed copies, which I will hand out, which I'll leave here for you all to have if you'd like one.
Yes.
Of course, can always, is on our subcommittee and can put you in contact
he's
with
got a
us.
foot in all camps. So
Yeah.
he's good.
We'll send this slide deck out electronically, and something we should probably think about, because it came up at last night's community corrections advisory meeting, is there space to have a joint meeting to talk through some of these specific community corrections issues, so food for thought.
I'd also like to see passes given to current residents of halfway houses so that they can be here in the future when we figure out that public input process, because it's really strange not to have them here having their input considered as well.
Great, so let's think about agenda setting for next month.
Yes, we want to decide on the length of these meetings going forward. And we want to talk about access for public with opinions, feedback, questions, that kind of thing. So if we can just wrap up talking about those, several notes and things, please.
Great, so thoughts on the length of this meeting?
2 hours.
An hour and a half enough?
I say 2 hours.
I say 2 hours, but can we start earlier?
Can everybody start earlier?
You say what?
We started at
5:30?
6 today.
5:30? Can everybody make 5:30?
So the meeting, the next meeting will be 2 hours from 5:30 to 7:30. It's 2 weeks from today. a good date for the next meeting. And from there, we can maybe doodle poll the meetings after that. Or poll, send out one of those survey polls. What is the date, please?
The 10th, October 10th.
Joanna, is it possible maybe set the next two meetings, maybe on the 10th and 24th, just so their calendar?
I'm going to grab my phone.
Thursdays are,
Here.
yeah, we'll try to do it here.
Yeah, either here or Blair Caldwell. We're aiming to have board meetings here.
Once we confirm all this, we'll get out the calendar invites and all.
You're doing that, now you're changing the Thursday?
This is
the only one we've ever had.
Not only am I writing ordinances, but I'm changing days.
Every other week.
Well, we're just saying the next two, just to stay on task to the end of the year.
So the 10th and the 24th.
Is it proposed?
Is
What
the,
what are the ideas for including the community in the feedback process? Like, if it's real time, that's best. How can we do that?
I feel like we might need to establish exactly what we might need feedback on. If it is kind of walking through the same things that we're walking through, visioning what does the future look like, what does better look like. Those could be questions that are posed. And I don't know if that's in a space like this or in between time offering, can we establish an email that folks can send comments to, a phone number that folks can leave messages on. I don't know what is best for folks out in the community, with the open invitation to attend the meeting.
I'd like to see, community corrections doing some focus groups inside of the facilities, with, some of us there, or having some kind of feedback surveys in there where they can give us their ideas and envision what could be.
Is that something we have a chance of arranging before our next meeting?
Depending upon the structure of the questions, if we wanted to spend some time, with Johanna to craft some questions or.
We could ask the same question we asked the group.
and I could also send out an email to ask for additional questions, if this was on some time, additional questions for a focus group. Putting focus group with some of that envisioning that we did tonight with community corrections residents between now and the 10th. As well as setting up an email, maybe phone number, and an open invitation.
Question for zoning, do you guys have a list of all of the neighborhood organizations that you send to?
Our department
Because
does
I would think
maintain,
that list would be helpful
Yeah.
here.
we have that.
You should have neighborhood group. Don't you have a central neighborhood group that's? No, but.
Oh, INC.
Yeah, I think we should have.
I think we take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's not a super representative group of people.
I think
You
it's
will end up-
representative
You will end
of
up in those
the
neighborhoods. You will end up in those neighborhoods, I mean, and let me tell you, I've experienced
Yeah.
with full petitions, everything else.
Yeah.
That's why we have your list, if it's a broader neighborhood organization list.
We have a list of registered RNOs.
Can we do a Google form with, some of the questions we've asked the group tonight, so that we can just put it out for the public, get their feedback?
Yeah, that's easy to do. We can also do it as an auto reply on the email. We can send forward survey questions to elicit feedback from the public.
And at a city level, we can link to that through web pages, through Facebook pages. I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to get that out. But that's also general public. If we're talking about residents, I would look to you for how to get it to those facilities and
We'll
staff.
spend some time figuring out. how to get it to the people currently in place in the district.
And actually, I think this is a foretelling of what we might be doing in between meetings. Some of the groundwork, some of the homework. And I hope everybody's up for that.
Is there any particular topic that people would like more information on at the next meeting? Do we want zoning, invite zoning back again? I think Andrew and Tina have offered to be here every meeting, just at least in the audience.
Andrew will be available.
Isn't the DCJ or aren't you guys or DOC or somebody presenting what the requirements are to be a community corrections? Is that what it's supposed to be tonight?
It's an idea that to understand again the programmatic requirements that exist in the current state, how they affect the future state. So I'm hearing potentially a presentation by the Division of Criminal Justice, their Office of Community Corrections around statewide requirements.
Candy, you were gonna say?
I feel like, I mean, in city council, every other week, we have time for public comment. There are people who don't feel comfortable writing, who don't feel comfortable contributing that way. And so is there any way that we can make some space for people maybe who have sat through this entire thing and have a comment and are here to insert that into the space?
Well, you know, I think we should consider that. This meeting in particular, we didn't want to exclude you all. We were working with a very short time frame, and we wanted to kind of set up what we're gonna do going forward. But I think that's appropriate for folks to take the time out from their day to come in here and sit with us.
I like that. I like that idea because we've got some very, very, very smart ladies that are sitting behind us, and we definitely want to have their input.
That's the ladies.
Yes, just the ladies. I'm sorry. But
Yeah, we can have a rule that if it's already been said, don't be redundant, but if it's something that's missing.
But even 5 minutes where people have minutes to come. Yes. Awesome.
What would that look like in terms of time and how we can structure it to make it efficient and maybe productive? What does that look like in terms of how much time people have for that?
Well, we just extended the meeting by, so, are we open to using that additional 30 minutes for what we're doing right now? And to use our 90?
I wouldn't say expand it that much, but I would at least open it up 10 minutes to hear what individuals have to say.
Can I just
Like you
ask,
said.
excuse me, let me
Sure.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Let's see, by show of hands, how many people in the gallery would have liked to have spoken this evening?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we got about a dozen people right here in the gallery, so.
Yeah.
Is there anything that can happen between meetings? Or is this the right time to have those conversations?
I guess I should ask that question, is this sort of part of the process we're trying to build out, or do we just want to allow for a single meeting around general public input? I think their strategies are different depending on what the community wants to do.
I think it's gonna be tough to just do one.
I want to add something.
I mean, or potentially to community meetings. You know, I mean, I want us to be incredibly thoughtful in the time that we have. We have effectively right now 5 meetings left, right? And we're butting up against that in the effectively December timeframe. So I think we can potentially have something in between, or we have two meetings where it is a community interest. But we have a lot of work to do, and we have a very short period of time as well.
I'm sorry, I have to object. We brought folks here who have been working on these solutions. Their voice is just as important as yours and other systems officials. And oftentimes, Denver in particular, but not exclusively, prioritizes the folks in the suits over the folks with lived experiences who have even more expertise. And so their voices are just as valuable. They are part of the process. They are the people closest to the pain, and they need to be incorporated into this process.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Would the group be willing to give 10 minutes up every meeting to community? And then we'll just have it timed 1 minute a person and to make sure we get as many.
I think Mike, Mary has something to say, then
To
I'll.
answer your question, that sounds good to me for a start. We might find ourselves needing more time for that.
Okay. Mike?
I do believe it's incredibly important to address hard structured issues before this committee. Zoning obviously is one of them. And the second one would be obviously important. The community's willingness to expand community corrections throughout the entire neighborhood area. But obviously, I mean, we've got to take care of the zoning problem. I mean, we have some structure that, we have a short time to deal with. And I agree with Eric that we need to stay focused on those barriers, if you will, that we need to break down.
But Mike, we're also gonna have some statutory considerations.
Statutory issues. I mean, those are hardcore issues that we need, we haven't even started to talk about the statutory issues. Zoning is obviously critical to this whole piece. And I think it would be important to do that. I'm okay to doing more meetings. I mean, I'm open for extended period of time. I do believe that it's important to have community input, to have our citizens that we're talking about to be a part of this. But I just, if we're gonna get this done, we have two distinctive areas that we really need to address.
So let me ask, because I'm not sure.
Can we go to Manny first?
I just wanted to add that I think we should have one discussion on how to start a halfway house. If you're gonna need to start new halfway houses, you're gonna have to know how to do it.
This is a question I have, and I don't know who can answer. The 6 meetings, are we stuck on 6, or we just stuck on the time frame being done by the end of the year?
We shouldn't be stuck on this 6.
I think that was just.
That was okay, any number of
Yeah.
It's more of the urgency to have something by January to the director.
So then I don't think we should be limited in number to meetings. That could expand what we're talking about now, making access more widely available. We just have to the end of the year. I mean, we really do have to the end of the year.
Can I propose something? Just how does the committee feel comfortable if Hassan and I, along with Johanna, spend some time thinking about the conversation about how to include the community voice in this meeting and flip out a plan to the group? Because we've kind of heard different pockets.
To review, to edit, to trash,
And then we can decide before the next meeting and then put that out so there's.
Yes, but I did hear agreement on a survey, an
Yes.
email, a comment time, at least 10 minutes of our meeting. So those are 3 things that I heard an affirmative on.
You heard those clearly.
Yes.
Does everyone agree on those 3 pieces? The survey, the comment structure, and 10 minutes? Or any? 10 minutes. To start with. Tentatively 10 minutes to open up for community at the end. We'll come up with a structure for what that will look like. Keep it moving.
I think it would be helpful for the individuals that are here, raise their hand. Obviously, there's a number of folks that have something to say. Maybe we start with this group and collect some of the questions that they have now. Start with that so we can understand what that would look like and then we structure it accordingly.
So for those of you who are here today, if you signed in with your emails, we could send out the survey questions and the email to you to provide feedback prior to the meeting?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll get a sense. I mean, obviously, there's some questions here.
And I think that's gonna come up each time we have a unique conversation here. it's gonna spark unique thoughts in the gallery as well, that we wanna make sure folks, if they didn't have time to say it, have an opportunity to provide it.
10 minutes won't help.
No,
10 minutes.
so we could get it in writing. Or expand it.
Are we gonna be able to expand capacity in this room or whatever room we occupy? Because I don't believe this is gonna be.
We'll go upstairs next time.
Can you create a structure so that when people are here, there's a card that they, if they do have questions, we're collecting them, and addressing them that way? Because sometimes people will go on and on about something and have one question that we could more efficiently answer if we were collecting cards.
You're saying the card would have community
It's
input
blank.
questions?
It would just be blank.
Oh,
That way, if
okay,
they
right.
have something in the moment, they can give it to us without having 10 minutes to get to the question.
I like that.
I mean, clearly here, the importance and commitment to including the community voice, the general public's voice. We just have to figure out the mechanics. We have some commitments we've made tonight. We've got some, we could spend some time fleshing out some detail to present to everybody, so it's in place by the next meeting.
We'll send out a draft process for everyone's feedback to the next meeting. And the community can provide it, but you know, that we set up.
And did we confirm the 10th and 24th?
Yes, we did.
May we also talk about the agenda for next week very quickly? Are there other context pieces you want brought in? What are the must-get-throughs to the next agenda?
One presentation that was actually scheduled for tonight, but the presenter had something come up and couldn't be here, was just to frame from a legislative perspective, community corrections at the statewide level budgetarily, and whether that be that same presenter or maybe members of the General Assembly come talk to us. I think there's about it.
Well, and Greg, I also think DCJ should be involved because they have a lot of, I don't know if you call them restrictions, but guidelines that need to be on the table.
Folks need to understand kind of the context for these guidelines
Right.
and that sort of stuff would be very helpful. I
Because
guess.
if you're gonna talk about changes, that's.
And what can be accommodated? But at the same time, then we listen to what's going on here and say, how does that mean we go back and work with our governor's advisory council on community corrections? And then say, you know what? Maybe we need to be changing some of the ways that we are regulating this industry.
So would it be helpful for the group to, in any particular order, to understand budgetary process related to community corrections or statutory constraints or programmatic standards? Does it matter how they're presented to us?
As long as that's paired with what we currently require of a halfway house, that bar is very low. And so I want to make sure people have an understanding of how easy it is to break into this field if you're a landowner that can accommodate, that has this zone. So what the state law says, what our limitations are, and at the city level, what are the requirements, if any.
But are there statutes around changing some of those rules that we have to focus in on? So if there's statutes, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read through all this, but it looks like there's a lot of rules in here. And so there might be statutes that, do we have to address those? Do we have to change some of those? Can we even change some of
And
those?
we can make that part of what we are sharing is that I think the statute more defines what we mean by community corrections in terms of the operation. It should be designed in a collaborative way with the community that wants those programs. And so we'll talk about kind of where that flexibility lies and how we can listen to this group, those sorts of adjustments.
And I appreciate all those questions. Those are the right questions, Michelle, because we started out talking about what was ideal.
Right.
We didn't want to start out talking about what can't be done, but certainly there's going to be barriers and obstacles that we're either going to have to circumvent or change some things faithfully. So, yes. Great question.
One more question, what's on this flash drive?
everything that's in here, the kill trees in
Oh,
here.
that's-
to-
Okay, great.
As long as it doesn't mess up with our voter elections. I think we're right.
It would be nice also to have some report out on the current status of people being transitioned. I know that we've limited this scope to not talk about that, but I think it's important for the public to be able to understand what's happening with our current population.
And what about the employees?
What about what?
The employees.
Is that something we can disseminate between meetings?
The employees is, that's
No, I'm not
interesting.
talking about the status of.
Yeah, I give, if people want, I can give a quick update on the first facility that, just in terms of an update of what's happening, and it's the William Street Center. If people have 5 minutes just for an update. So, obviously GEO operates 2 facilities in Denver, one of them being William Street, an 80-bed capacity facility for women, and then the male program at Tully Hall. The contract with City Council was extended through December 31st for GEO. However, it can't just have a hard stop for both programs. So one of the programs had to start coming offline, and that process has begun. So at William Street Center, there are 65 individuals, 65 women in placement. Over the course of September 9th through the 20th, William Street staff reviewed their files, gathered the information about their current level status in the program, what barriers those clients were facing to move to either non-residential supervision, or if they were being transferred to another community corrections facility in a neighboring county. All that information was presented to the referring agencies on Monday the 23rd this month. So the Department of Corrections was there for DOC clients, probation was there for direct sentence clients. In addition, the Division of Criminal Justice and my office sat in those meetings, and individualized transition plans were identified and developed. Roughly 29 individuals were recommended for continued residential programming, and they will be being referred or have been referred, and if accepted by Arapahoe County, will be moved to Arapahoe County. The ACRC program is operated by GEO. Here's the kind of conundrum there. ICCS is a non-GEO or CoreCivic operated facility in Jefferson County that has almost 0 capacity. They have created a few slots for new court sentences to place Denver women in that program. Adams County is a CoreCivic operated facility and has a 6 to 7 week wait list. So the decision to utilize Arapahoe County was, one, the willingness of their county to accept the Denver residents in placement. They had available beds opening and the ability to transfer William Street staff to that facility for some continuity of care. What I don't want to lose in this transition is that 29 were recommended for transfer. The remaining population was recommended to go to non-residential. So for the direct sentences, they would be moving to non-residential status. For the DOC population, they would be submitted, either they had a parole date or being submitted to the parole board corrected date or reviewed for ISP. So less than half of the current population is being recommended for transfer. Those transfers will start. 1 or 2 might happen this week. The rest, they'll be going in groups over the next 3 weeks. The residents have all are being talked to about their individual plans. And if any of those non-residential plans fail for whatever reason, then we'll have to reevaluate. If it's a housing issue, we have enlisted the support and services of community-based providers, whether they're part of the waging system for the Department of Corrections or they're just existing in the community. So we're working on that. So that's where we're at. BJ, you want to name?
Have they gone before the Arapahoe board, or is that in progress?
That's been in progress, but I think all but maybe a dozen have been reviewed and approved by Arapahoe.
And are the ones who are being transferred, is there rent freezing while they're transferred? If they have to find new jobs, then are they being granted extended travel time if they have to travel daily from jobs in Denver to the new facility?
transportation was one of those items looked at, like sometimes what made the most sense to get them to non-res, maybe even slightly before everything was completed in the program, and displace them by moving them to a county, or set them up. We wanted to set every resident up for success. But to answer your question, GEO has assured us that they will be given appropriate travel time to travel from ACRC to wherever their job placement is. They're also pursuing the ability to provide transportation funds for that population for at least 1 month, if not 2 months.
Let me ask you one other question. I don't know if you spoke to it, Greg. Someone asked about residents, current residents, if they have the house being allowed to come and join the gala. What?
Yeah, I think that was a suggestion, and we'll work on the details, and it's something that can happen. It's just about working through details.
Greg, I know Community Corrections takes on individuals from other counties into our community. It sounds like Denver's sending our residents to other counties. Is it just our residents going, or other counties who traditionally dump on us getting their funds back? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
I'm trying to think, I don't know off the top of my head, I do not believe there are any referrals at William Street that came from another county to begin with. Typically, those are reserved for Pier 1 or Haven because of the specialized nature of their services. So the clients in placement at William Street either declared Denver as a parole destination and came to Denver that way through DOC, or were directly sentenced by the Denver District Court. Many of the women identified for transfer to Arapahoe did have concurrent cases from Arapahoe County.
So, Greg, and the Denver Community Corrections Board will no longer be reviewing women clients.
No, that's not true. So we will no longer be accepting referrals from the Department of Corrections until we hopefully can figure out through this process how to stand up another female program in Denver County. We're left with one, the Haven, which has a capacity of 36 beds, but the criteria for acceptance and admittance into the Haven is pretty restricted around substance dependence, and you have to assess at a certain level. So we're going to lose the placement for Denver women to go into a facility in Denver County temporarily. It'd be one of my top goals to get that restored in even a better way in the future. We are, though, court side, if the court sentences a woman, a female to community corrections, we will find a placement, preferably in Jeffco, if not, we will counseling.
And non-res, we'll still with non-res.
But I think we can kind of wrap up.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for your and appreciate your time, especially those need to pay more.
You know, we're going to jump in here and ask questions. How are you doing?
How are you?
Fantastic.
Filming.
Live, yes. We're. You can find the link. Occupy, boycott the urban camping ban. Several others have already shared it. I was trying to draw people here live, but my channel's Cut the Plastic on YouTube. Cut the Plastic, all one word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Run into a lot most of the time.
Yeah, well, you know, when you get motivated by women like Lisa and Candi and Carrie, It's infectious and more productive than some of the straight up protesting that sometimes is counterproductive toward the final goal, which is permanent and lasting change. Sometimes you can't get it all that way.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
Good to see you. I saw you at the lunch on Saturday.
Oh yeah, we've been. I was gonna go to Suncor.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Miss CdeBaca. No, you're good actually. You're with the state. Yeah. So maybe you can answer the question.
Try.
I'm familiar with Oxford houses.
Okay.
Have you heard of this concept before?
I don't know. Go ahead.
So Oxford houses are basically small scale, 12 or less sober living communities established during the Reagan era as a federal mandate that zoning did not apply.
Oh, that's interesting. Who would have thought that?
Who would have thought that the federal government would have said, here's a, well, no, it's okay. Here's a way to do this, where the local municipal zoning is not, like, applicable. And yeah, so it's an interesting, I wasn't sure if...
Well, that's something, we're going to start to do brainstorming in the next couple of meetings, and those are the kind of things we should be researching.
Well, and I'm going to continue to spread that word, but that's my community comment.
You tell
Oxford houses.
You tell the mayor.
And I'll talk to you in a second too, because we were talking about.
I'm Joe.
I'm Brian.
Nice to meet you.
I will. So, I'm Brian. Johanna.
Hi, Brian.
He's being on camera. Oh, yeah, it's all right. The community.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just saying personally out of vanity.
Yeah, well,
I hate the sound of my own voice.
That's all right. The community needs to hear these things, and we need to be focusing on this. I mentioned to this gentleman with corrections, and I'm going to mention it a couple more times before the day is over. Oxford houses.
I love Oxford houses. I worked with them for a lot of years.
And then you're familiar how the federal rules behind Oxford houses basically wash away local zoning ordinances.
Very interesting. I mean, I think that there's a conversation to be had if he's not at the table. So, who are the guys who run Oxford House?
They're generally localized independent entities. They often stream out of like Alcoholics Anonymous and other.
Yeah, I have a whole map
entities.
of where they are. So you're saying the nature of their federal funding is a loophole
There was something.
for sober living?
Yeah, there was. So I am gratefully come on like 15 years comfortably. And yeah, like having.
You went to an Oxford house?
No.
Oh, you didn't.
I actually thought about opening one up in our community, and the board that I was on, that was working with homeless and funded housed persons due to mental disabilities and other things, had considered buying land and setting that up as its own entity. Because basically it's supposed to be self-perpetuating, and it does have an organizational rule based on federal guidelines that overrides the local municipal zoning to allow 8 to 12, I think it is, per unit.
Yeah. Well, that's really,
Zoning
that's a really interesting piece to
I
bring
remember
forward.
correctly.
Thank you for
It's in
sharing
the back.
that. I'll share that with people to see maybe if there's someone we can bring in to describe that.
That's exactly, that's what it takes.
New ways forward, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A third way, not just
What
to say it that way.
is an optimum future?
Yes.
Right?
You know, I'm wondering, who are you doing this for? Like, are you, is anyone paying you, or is it, where is it going to go?
Oh, so my YouTube channel, because we're live, is and so you can go to Occupy Denver on Facebook or a variety of community action groups, and it's going to get spread around a little bit more once we're done. But yeah.
If you let me know how people can access it, we can include that in our outreach for community input, or they know, so I can let people know where